really want to give you a general survey today of the Triune area. This is an 1878 image of the map, De Beers map, and you can see it's really a happening place. That area out there has lost more landmarks than half the county has. It's just amazing that this is such a important community. And of course 840 and they're coming from Murfreesboro one way and Nashville's coming down through Nolensville, and the only place they're safe is College Grove coming up from the south. This is kind of a little introduction that I did for the book, and it's so true. Historically, Triune in eastern Williamson County has rivaled any Middle Tennessee community in wealth, education, agriculture, and the social standings of its citizens. Just reading the names Perkins, Claybrook, Cannon, Jordan, Patton, Bostic, Hyde, Scales, Wilson, Copeland, Osborne, King, McCandless, Page, Johnson, and you can go on and on. These are all outstanding citizens. The 18th district was one of the wealthiest in the county, and of course Triune is right in the center of the 18th district. But while there were 6 brick academies in the 11th district, the Harpeth Union on Nelson Creek, 1820, Hardeman Male Academy, 1828 to 1903, Hardeman Arrington Male Academy, 1835, and then we have the Harpeth Female Academy, Porter's Female Academy, and then the Bostic Female Academy. And then in some of these academies, like Peoples taught there, some great educators were out there. And it's amazing, that little community placed such much of their wealth in the education of their children. It's remarkable. Now, if you look at the map, most of that area was carved up in the land grants that North Carolina gave the Revolutionary soldiers. And just look at the size. Sumner got 12,000 acres. Robert Nelson got 3,349. Alexander Nelson got 763. McRae got 4,800. And John Nelson got 4,800. And if you look on the map, that pretty much takes up the area. And so then these other families came in, the Bostics, the Perkins, the Pattons, had to buy the land from the land grant. Because many of these guys didn't, General Sumner never came to Williamson County. It's had many names. There was an attempt to have a little town out there named Nelsonville. Then Flemingsburg is towards the east, Hardeman's Crossroads, and then finally in 1845 Triune, which took its name from the Methodist Church. Triune Methodist Church is there today. This is a photograph of King's Chapel, which was started in 1815, and then it left there and went to Nolensville Road and became Triune Methodist Church. And then this is what it looks like today. There's a subdivision there, of course, but at least they took the building and turned it into something useful. And of course, this is a picture of the Triune Church that was built like in 1874 after the Civil War, because it was burned by the Federals. Today, the roof line has been changed. There's a traditional steeple there today, but this I think is in 1951. Mother's Day was a big thing at the Triune Methodist Church, and you can see the crowds coming. It was kind of like a reunion for all those families to come back to that mother church. Wilson Creek Primitive Baptist Church was organized in 1804. The church building was built in 1816, and it is the oldest church building in Williamson County. Now it's been modified, it's been changed, but this is what it looked like before the door was changed. Sadly, it's like a lot of country churches. I think they only meet once a month, and there's maybe 5 or 6 who show up. Sad, but these little churches do die. And of course, Arrington Church of Christ, which is a newer church, is on the Horton Highway, and it was started in 1887, and it is built around what you see today. In I think 1978 is when it was bricked. There is, and I kind of left it out because it's right on the edge, but Greens Grove, which is an African American church, had a school and a church. They tore down the old church building and built a new one, and it's quite a thriving congregation. A new church that's come in from really the College Grove area was Locust Ridge Primitive Baptist Church, and it moved over on the Murfreesboro Road before you get to Triune, coming from Arrington. And of course, we've got the Triune Baptist Church, which I just found out was built in 1992, and it's a thriving church. It's right. It was there before the 840 came through and before the growth that's hitting the eastern end of the county. The schools in Triune, these are some we have pictures of. Hardeman Academy was built in 1829. It was located about a quarter of a mile west of the Crossroads. When I say Crossroads, the old Crossroads is a little bit north of the present Crossroads that you see where the Kangaroo gas is, just let's say a few yards away. But John S. Claybrook, who was a nephew of Judge Overton, was called out there to teach in that school, and it became a first-rate school. Unfortunately, it burned in 1903. It had served as a public school before that. And then this building is still standing. Again, money was placed in the education of the children out there. And Dr. Jonathan Bostic was a bachelor and didn't have any children, but when he died, he was in Mississippi, he left his money to build a girls' school, and this is what they came up with in 1891. Well, it opened in 92, but anyways, Claybrook was one of the trustees, and Perkins sold him 11 acres, and that building is still, it's a private residence today, and it was a public school until 1949. This building just breaks my heart. I just love it. I wish it was still standing. Arrington Mill. Now, it's named that because the creek that runs through there is called Arrington Creek, and it runs into the Harpeth River there around Arrington. It was built by John A. Jordan, and that is Jordan, not Jordan. They'll tell you quickly. It was built before the Civil War as a distillery. Then when the war came along, the Federals turned it into a hospital and a storehouse. And then after the war, it became really a first-rate grist mill, and it was turning out as much as 150 barrels of flour a day. So it was a humdinger of a building. This is the Tollgate House, which would have been just south of the Methodist Church, if you look on that 1878 map. And kind of humorously, Uncle Billy Martin was the old bachelor that lived there that collected the toll. And when you went through, he lifted the pole, and the cars or trucks go through after paying the toll. And he was known for saying, "Damn a man that won't pay his toll," because some people were, because he was old and not seeing too well, they would slip through and get away from him. But the toll gates were lifted in the mid-20s, and what we know as Nolensville Road or Horton Highway was started in 1929, as was Franklin Road. This is a jewel, isn't it? What a shame we lost that house. But this is Samuel Fern Perkins Jr., and he named his farm and the house Westview. And he started building on it right before the Civil War. And his farm, we had 1,600 acres. According to the 1860 census, he had 61 slaves, 10 slave quarters, and he was worth $65,200. Sadly, this burned in 1927. And 840 runs right through the foundation of it today. I want to read for you little tidbits of letters and things that are most valuable for historians. This is a letter written by Margaret Perkins Bradley. She was Nicholas Bigby Perkins' daughter, and she's writing her husband, who apparently she's in Franklin and he is in Mississippi at his sister-in-law's plantation at Tunica, Mississippi. But she's writing this March the 7th, 1861, and she says, "My dearest one, I do not know if this will reach you or not, as they have stopped the mail with seceding states." Mississippi, by that time, had checked out of the Union. "We are all as well and fat as butterballs. I'm fattening by the day to my distress. Well, what must be will be. I went to the wedding at Triune. Anne May was dressed very fine, but the house, the finest house and furniture I ever saw in any clime or state, public or private. The house has 16 rooms, 3 halls, 4 dressing rooms, 2 china rooms, the size of this room where the children are sleeping. 14 rooms are carpeted in Brussels, which would be Brussels carpets, velvet curtains for each of the rooms at $50 a window. Anne had a great many presents. Sam Perkins told me that the amount for the presents was about $400. All the kin were there. From our family there were Abram and Mary Amari, Ed and Peter Perkins, and myself. To say one good thing, Peter was there and did not drink a drop of anything to drink. I watched him and others. I and several friends stood at the door while they ate supper, and he did not touch a drop of anything that had liquor in it. Said he would not even take whip because it had wine in it. But Abe Maury had to be put to bed. Edwin Perkins Cannon, the man who married them, was so tight that he could just stand up. So these little things give an insight of the things that were going on at this house. It was probably the most expensive house in the 19th century built in Williamson County. And sadly, it is no more. This was an interesting landmark that it's a shame it is gone, but in 1840, 2 brother-in-laws, Thomas F. Perkins, who was a cousin to Samuel, and Edward Leland Jordan, they built that building, opened the store. When the war came along, the Federals used it as the jail. And this picture here shows the Franklin Boosters there in 1924. And I think I've read in the newspaper, this was torn down in the early 50s, 1950s, and it was right at the Crossroads. This is another sad house that is gone. Next door to the Perkins Jordan brick store stood the home of W.W. Crockett, and he was a local carriage maker, wagon maker. And in 1940, this was the home of Henry Skelly. The Skellys had just left Boston, and went out and bought the Crockett farm, and this house burned shortly after that. It was a beautiful building. Another one of those landmarks out there that is no more. John S. Claybrook, he's the guy that came and started school at the Hardeman Academy, and he fell in love with Mary Ann Claybrook, which you would love to because her father was Samuel Perkins. And there was going to be some reward in marrying into that family. He built Claybrook, Brooklyn, and this was the home, and it was a 600-acre farm, and it's between Triune and Arrington. It's the Adams farm today. And Claybrook is important to us because he was the first president of the Decatur, Alabama Railroad. He was also finding in the agricultural census of 1860, he was producing, I forget how many thousands of pounds of tobacco. And tobacco really hadn't gotten started in Williamson County at that time, but he's one of the leaders. And this is portraits of he and his wife, and they are in the Tennessee Museum. Royal Oaks, what a house. This was built in 1864 for Colonel William B. King, and it's also between Triune and Arrington, which would be west of Triune. And it became the J.J. Christman place in 1906. And then in the 90s, the heirs of that family sold it to Hank and Mary Brockman, and they took it down piece by piece and moved it to Old Hillsborough Road, and it's today known as Pontotoc. But the reason for the Royal Oak is there's, I think, maybe one tree still standing, but it's almost 6 feet in diameter. They're enormous. They were white oaks. This is another sad house. This is the home of John S. Rushworm, and he was a nephew of General Sumner. And he and his brother, his father died, and his mother sent him to Middle Tennessee to be with her nephew, and he was raised by the Sumners. And this house was over on Spantown Road. And in the 90s, Mary Pierce and I went out there to check on it because it was on the National Register, and we'd heard it was in bad condition. And it was one of those things that really broke your heart. You would think builders would know that you can't put brick in the ground because moisture will cause them to decay, and that was what was happening. One side of the house had been soaked, I guess, over the years from the no gutters, and the brick were decaying, and so that side of the house was sadly sagging. And so I think the Taylors owned this farm at the time. They had it torn down, and the mantles and the staircase and all the great wood in it was taken to Nashville and traded out. But this was a real loss. It was on the National Register, and it was a very stately house. This is an interesting thing, and it wasn't torn down until 1965, but this was Thomas D. Porter came here to teach, and he built the house, and probably the school was in there. And there was also a store there later. It was known as Spartanburg. I think one of the pictures I have of this building, you can see across, they call it the Spartanburg. There's a whole group, the Gentrys, this Jordan family, and some others came from Spartanburg, South Carolina, and they all settled on Spantown Road. And this store, at this time, is the Gentry McCandless store, as it says up there. And in 1900, it was sold to the Newsom family, and they lived there 65 years. And again, the same thing, the foundation was becoming faulty, and they tore it down, and there's a ranch house there today on the corner of Spantown Road and Horton Highway. This is another sad loss. This was on McCandless Road, and it was the home of Dr. John Copeland. And it was named Crystal Valley because there's springs that are feeding Arrington Creek. And it was a great farm, and James McCandless had his large cattle operation there. And sadly, it burned. I want to say maybe in the 80s, but it could have been in the early 90s. Here's another house. Look at that. Grace Payne was from Nashville, but her family were Scales. Her mother was a Scales. And John Weekly Covington, we're going to talk about him later, but they're standing in front of this house before it was torn down. It was built by Dr. Newton Jordan, and then in 1860 it became Ellsworth Scales' house. And it's east of Triune, almost on the Rutherford County border, on the county line. You can see it on the 1878 map. Again, here's another great house. It had faulty foundation, and it was torn down. It was built in 1820. Alexander Ralston, who we're going to know was a cabinet maker. And then it becomes Thomas W. Pettis, and the Pettises are an important family. I think I maybe left them out in listing, but they are an important family, and some of that family's still there. 1925, because of the faulty foundation, they had to take it down. And this is another jewel, the Lockie Garrett brick home. It's on Nelson Creek. And look at that style. It's so plain. And the hollyhocks in the front there reminds you of a garden you'd see in an English cottage. And again, this house is no longer standing. And this is another sad one. This is the Page, John Page home, and it's set up on a high rise overlooking Horton Highway, and it burned several years ago, in the 70s, I'm thinking. But John Page is an important guy. He marries Margaret Ann Wilson in 1830. They have 10 children. One of the children ends up with the property and the farm. It was a 1,500-acre farm, and it was part of General Sumner's land grant. But when he died, he had 10,000 acres in a cotton plantation in Mississippi. And John Henderson was appointed one of the administrators of the estate, and so they go down to Mississippi to sell it, and they can't get anybody that wants to buy it. The farm was worn out, and so the Pages got almost nothing for it. This is another sad house. John H. Crockett built this house, very Greek Revival style. It was so common in Williamson County. A lot of houses were built. This is 1855 on Osborne Road. His daughter married Thomas Hillary Roberts, and they reared their family here. And sadly, it burned, I think, in the 70s. It's now called Colonial Estates. Mr. Clay, one of the Claybrooks, developed that farm, and mysteriously this house went up in flames. And then here's another house, another Roberts house, which is over on Roberts Road, right off of Cox Road. And sadly, it burned. But the Roberts lived in this house 122 years. And Bobby Hood was living there when it burned. The stores, of course, the Crossroads, there were many stores there. I just happen to have 3 pictures here. Walter Beasley, you can see that's a fine brick store, and it was right there on the corner across from his house, which he lived in, the old Hardeman house. And of course, you see the house in the background over there? That is the W.W. Crockett house. This was where the telephone office was. You know, Triune had a telephone for a lot of communities had telephones, but and this was the Adams store. Mr. Maxwell was with the telephone company, and then Ed Brown's store is there, but it's on its way out. I noticed there was a for sale sign on the property, so somebody's going to take that down. Ed was a great guy, and this is so sad. Thanks, Ginger. This is one of Ginger's pictures, but this is the William King Ershman house. And it was sold recently, and the house, you can see, you're right there. Look at those fine logs. And the developer tore it down, and the logs disappeared. And so luckily, Ginger was one that really helped bring attention to this, and the county planning department made them build one back, but it's not the same house. This is, look at those logs, so fine.
Why would you do that?
Why would you do that, Ginger? I don't know. This is a landmark, and it's almost like well, I won't say that. Anyways, it's a great loss. Today, it's a subdivision. And this is the Hardeman Beasley Arnold house, and it's an aerial photograph because I think it's so grown up. I was going to go out there and take a picture of it, and I don't think I could get one, but this is an aerial photograph. This would have been, it's log, and it was, Hardeman moved out there to Triune in 1822, and so I'm going to say this house was built about that time. Walter Beasley owned it. He was a merchant there in town, and then his wife, Mrs. Mildred Arnold, who was a great teacher all over the county and Franklin Elementary, and the house is still in the family, but it's neglected. It needs attention. And again, this is another great house. It is still there. Josiah Fleming built this house about 1830, and he's the one that had the store, which is on Rocky Hill, which is just almost close to where Mr. Johnson's house is. But he had apparently a very prosperous store there, and that area became known as Flemingsburg. And then we've Dr. Samuel McMurray lived there. Miss Mary grew up there, didn't she?
Part of the time.
Yeah. This is a great house because you see the first story is partly in the ground. That's the basement, but it's the kitchen. You go down and you've got a brick floor and you've got a fireplace that you can stand up in. It's got a long crane that sweeps across. It's one of the last of that sort in the county, but it's still standing and it's in good condition the last time I was there. And then this, of course, is the Osborne family, and they were early. They came here about 1806, and this is the John Osborne family, and they're standing in front. This is a log house. The old man with the beard is William Osborne, and he was an old Confederate soldier that was an old bachelor that lived with the family. But the house has been, the weatherboard's been stripped off, and Perry has done a great job in restoring it. And look at that limestone chimney, which is so common in Williamson County. And again, this is another Newt Jordan that built this house on Possum Trot, or Patterson Road as it's called today. But it was on the site of William Jordan's home, which had burned, and then it was built back by Newt. And he married his first cousin, Mary. That's very common in Williamson County. And the descendants of the Jordans still live here today. And then, of course, we have the Hydes. This is a most interesting family. And Anne is here today, and I'm so glad to see her. Solitude is log underneath that. But what's really so marvelous about this homestead is this wonderful two-story limestone smokehouse. And the Hydes were very influential in the Wilson Creek Primitive Baptist Church. But that smokehouse is just wonderful. And this, of course, is an important house. E.P. Wilson and his little son John U. Wilson in the buggy. And then the black family there is Walter Ewing. And they had lived with the Perkins before the Wilsons. And this house was the farm manager's house for Westview Plantation. And if you look on that map, next to this house were the slave quarters. And they were there in 1878. And today the Cawthorns, do the Cawthorns still live there? I think they've torn down the old smokehouse.
I thought they tore the whole house.
Did it? Have they torn the whole house down? It's going to be subdivided, I know.
Yeah, overnight.
Yeah, overnight. And this is a house that's really important, I think. The Scales are an early family. Joseph Scale built this house on Patton Road. And in the 1940s, John W. Little came out and he bought up a lot of Triune property, and this was one of them. And he named this particular farm Happy Hollow, as you can see there, and that's him with his dogs. And today, this is Robert Burns' farm, which is right off Horton Highway and Patton Road. The old Scale Cemetery is out there in the field. You can see it's got some trees around it. Every community needs at least one historian, and by grabs, Triune had 3. Everything that I put into this book came from these 3 guys. I didn't do anything but just put it together. But when John Jordan, Leland Jordan retired, he came back home and he started researching his community. Now, he was born like in 1869, so he had a long memory. And he wrote articles that were published in the Review-Appeal, and I copied those and put them in the book. Then Mr. Webb, he wrote for the Review-Appeal, and every week he would do a family or do a community or a school. and he's really does a great job of making you aware of the history of the community. And then, of course, John Weekly Covington, who I got to meet before he died at a Historical Society meeting right back here on the back porch at Carnton. And he died maybe a month or two after that, I think. His wife, Kenneth, taught at College Grove, and she was very helpful. But think 3 good ones. And Miss Bowman pays a great tribute to John Weekly Covington for taking her out there when she's doing her research and saying, you've got to do this house, you've got to do this family. And so these kind of people are very important to these communities.